Hello, and welcome to the Evidence-Based Exercise Rehabilitation and Sport Performance channel. This channel is for the healthcare movement professional looking to incorporate applied research concepts into their current practice setting. Today's topic, the power of understanding confidence intervals. The objectives of this discussion are to determine the degree to which foam rolling and static stretching vary in their results, and this is not what you think it is, and to provide a means by which you can utilize reported confidence intervals in your programming in order to achieve optimal results with your patients and clients. Hello everyone, and welcome to this video on how to apply and interpret confidence intervals and effect size. When it comes to taking research and being able to apply it clinically, these are two very important measures that you want to be able to pull and extract out of an article. And I'm going to show you how to do that today. So we have an example article right here. This is from the Journal of Sport Rehabilitation, 2014, by Moore et al. And what these individuals do is they're looking at the effect of foam rolling and static stretching on passive hip flexion range of motion. So real quickly here, what I'm going to do is just read through the abstract so you have an idea of what these individuals did, and then we're going to go straight down to the statistics section, and we're going to see if what they reported matches up and what that means for us clinically, what we can potentially expect if we end up using this information in our day-to-day practice. Context. Many athletes report that foam rollers help release tension in their muscles, thus resulting in a greater range of motion when used before stretching. To date, no investigators have examined foam rollers in static stretching. The objective of this study is to determine if foam rolling before static stretching produces a significant change in passive hip flexion. This is a controlled laboratory study that was performed in a laboratory research setting. Participants involved were 40 subjects with less than 90 degrees of passive hip flexion range of motion and no lower extremity injury in the 6 months prior to data collection. The interventions provided were, during each of 6 sessions, a subject's passive hip flexion range of motion was measured before and immediately after static stretching, foam rolling and static stretching, foam rolling alone, or nothing, control group. To minimize accessory movement of the hip and contralateral legs, subjects lay supine with a strap placed across their hip and another strap located over the uninvolved leg just superior to the patella. An inclinometer was used to measure and take the passive hip flexion movements. So the stats can be intimidating. That kind of gives you an idea of how this was set up. So let's take a look at the statistics that were here. And sometimes I think what throws us off is there's a lot of numbers in there and we don't know what numbers to look at and what numbers we need to interpret and things like that. So first of all, we're only going to stick with certain numbers in here. I'm not going to go through everything, but I'm going to pick out the more clinical important ones, clinical and statistically important ones, and kind of outline step by step how we would pick an article apart like this and what the statistics would mean for us. It's going to mean a lot more than just looking at the average increases or decreases that these groups received or didn't receive. Okay, so when we go through this, the results say that there was a significant change in passive hip flexion range of motion regardless of treatment. Okay, this F in these subscript numbers, this has to do with the ANOVA testing that they performed. Okay, we can't do anything with that clinically. Now this p-value we can. We often hear that we're looking for a p-value of p less than 0.05, and if we find that, then that indicates that there is a statistical significance. Now, what does that mean for us clinically? Clinically, it doesn't mean anything. What it means is the groups are mathematically different. So it's a good start. So there was something there that took place between these interventions that tells us that these groups are indeed statistically different from one another. Now, the follow-up question that we have to ask is, how different are they? What is the magnitude or the size of that difference? And what can I expect if I am going to apply this to the general population? Because we need to remember that when we take a sample, this was 40 subjects, when we take a sample of subjects, we're grabbing them from the greater population and we're using them as a reference to what the whole population, what we could potentially see. Okay, so they're representing that greater population. So let's read into this a little bit more. So we know that there was a change in hip flexion range of motion regardless of the type of treatment. Subjects receiving foam roll and static stretch together had a greater change in passive hip flexion range of motion when compared to the individuals that only got static stretch only. And again, they're telling us that those groups are different because they're saying P is 0.04. That's less than 0.05. So statistically speaking, they're different, but we don't know how much different clinically. We'll get to that in a little bit here. Let's see, foam roll and static stretch had a greater change in passive hip flexion compared with foam rolling as well. There's that P number again, that is less than 0.05. So that means they are statistically or mathematically different. And same with the control group, P is 0.001. So right now, if I am a clinical practitioner and I'm reading this, all I know is those groups were different. I have no idea which one's the best. I have no idea what could I anticipate if I applied these treatments to the greater population that I work, assuming that they fall into the same demographic. So let's get that information because they actually reported that in here. We want to know more than just they're different. Okay, so if we go down, let's go down. All right. These guys, I want to give them a shout out because they did some really good reporting here. There are a lot of authors that don't report 95% confidence intervals or effect sizes. That can be for a variety of reasons. So not to say that if they're not reported, the authors did a bad job. Sometimes for space reasons, they're not included. And sometimes, yeah, they're just not calculated. So it all depends on the journal that we're looking at and who the editors were and who the authors were. There's a lot of things at play there. Okay, but these guys did an awesome job because clinically right here, this little chart gives me a lot of information. So let's look at what it's actually telling us here so I know how to go about using this information and I can anticipate what I'm going to see in my potential setting if I'm working with the same demographic here. Let's start with change from baseline. So when we look pre to post, they did a baseline measure in that passive hip flexion, and then they did the static stretch only. Okay, this is the mean, this first number that I highlighted right there, that 12.26 degrees. Okay, so they got an increase that large, plus or minus 4.21 degrees. Okay, with the foam roller and static stretch, that number jumps up 23.5 or 24 degrees increase, plus or minus about roughly another 4 degrees there. So far that's looking a little bit better than that. The foam roller only got a 6.88. Okay, so they did see an increase there, but it was much smaller compared to the other two. And then with the control group here, there was actually an increase from the baseline, even though they didn't do anything, right? 3.74 plus or minus 1.81. This is why we always have a control group. Now, so if we see right here the means or the averages of the entire group, okay, that's great, but you're going to have people in that group that respond better, like you would in the clinic or your training center, or you're going to have people that respond not as well. They're going to go in the other direction, right? So we want to know if we were to take the results of this particular study and we were to apply it to the population at large that we pulled the sample from, what could we potentially expect to see? And again, remember, the same demographic here as what they used in this study. That's key. You can't be comparing demographics that are different because we'll obviously have different outcomes, right? So that's what the 95% confidence interval will tell us here. So when we look at this confidence interval, okay, we have, if we were to apply this to the general population at large, okay, we saw in our study that the overall increase was 12.26 plus or minus 4, but what we could anticipate in the greater population would be anywhere between 2.62 and 21.83. Now, as a clinician, that makes a lot of sense to me. And that tells me, wow, I can get a little bit to a lot. And that makes sense with what we would see clinically. Not everyone responds the same way. You have responders and non-responders to treatment. And it's up to us to figure out how and why and when and where and all that stuff as to why the response is taking place or not taking place. Let's take a look at foam roller and static stretching. So when we look at these, look at the confidence interval there. So that's 15.57 all the way up to 31.53. So again, if we had to compare these two, the foam roller plus the static stretch is looking a lot better, right? So clinically, I would say to myself, wow, if I had the time, would I want the foam roller and the static stretching together? You bet. Okay. Lastly, let's look at the foam roller only. Now, this is interesting to see. You're not always going to see what you anticipate seeing. So a lot of people, even though they may report they feel better, that doesn't mean that they necessarily have a objective outcome that's better. So that would be more of a subjective, which is good. We want that patient preference, right? That goes along with our evidence-based practice model. But when we look at what the foam roller did just by itself, you had, if we apply this to the general population, you could actually have you could have people fall anywhere between losing 2 degrees all the way up to gaining 15.84 there, roughly 16 degrees. So you could go in the opposite direction on this one. Okay, and again, keep in mind, this is in a controlled laboratory setting. So athletes do their foam rolling and stretching in various different ways. So this is in a controlled setting. So that's the amount of variance that we have with some control. Imagine how much more variance there would be without the control. Okay, and then in the control group, we could expect a loss of a little less than a degree all the way up to gaining about roughly 8 degrees. Okay, so that's what these all mean. So again, you pick up an article, number one, you look for a p-value, and that p-value tells you if the groups are different. If they're not different, then we can look at the descriptive statistics and get what we can from those, but that's not really telling us a whole lot. That means more research would need to be done. If we notice that p-value is less than 0.05, now we're checking out, all right, let's look at those actual mean differences, which is what we do here, right? So 12, 23, 6, and 3. Now we want to know, what can I expect in my practice of the individuals with the same demographic? And here are those confidence interval ranges right there if we were to use those. Now, here's another thing we could do. We could actually compare these different modalities against each other. You could not only compare the means here, so we got a 12 on average, a 12 degree change versus a 23 degree change. We could compare these ranges, right? So if you look at this 95% confidence interval, by the way, 95% means that the likelihood that the mean of the population at large falls within this range is 95. You'll find that 95% of the time it's likely. Okay. But when you look at these numbers, these groups aren't 100% different from one another, right? So the confidence interval here is you'll expect anywhere between 3 and 22 degree increase versus the foam roller is 16 to 32. Now there's an overlap there. there are some people in this foam roller group, let's just take 16 because it's the bottom of the range, and that 16 falls within the static stretch only group. Okay, so what that means is, all right, we have a chance that we're going to be working in a higher range here, but since this group overlaps with that group, these ranges overlap, that means there's going to be some people that still do foam roller plus static stretch that are still going to get in that same range that you would see in the static stretch only group, because there's that overlap between the two sets of data. Okay, so for some people, even though they're doing both, they're not going to see a treatment effect that's any better than what they would see if they just did the static stretching alone. So these intervals are very, very powerful and can help us out a lot. Let's look at this one right here. Okay, so we have 16 to 31.5, right? And then we have a -2 to 16, okay? So these two don't overlap. This one is just short. Wait, we got 15.57, 15.84. They barely overlap. Okay, they're just about right there. They're very, very close. They're tenths of some points from overlapping here. So that means that if we do a foam roller only and we compare it to a foam roller and a static stretch, we're still going to get a better result. And this would be the better treatment to choose because of the less overlap, the less chance that this number, a number from here, is going to fall into this range. So that's what that would indicate. Okay, so very, very important. If you are reading an article and they didn't report the 95% confidence intervals, all you have to go by then are the means, which is quite a bit different. When you're seeing these here in front of you, even though you're seeing 12.26, you're seeing that the bottom end of that is 3 and the top end is 22. So that's pretty different than just 12 from a clinical standpoint. So this is the power of knowing the 95% confidence interval and why you want to have it. If you don't have it, then you have to go off of the means. That's all you can do. Okay. Let's look at the effect size. The effect size is another way of talking about or explaining how large the magnitude is. So down here, we took and we created, with the 95% confidence interval, we created a range to show how different these outcomes could be in the general population. With the effect size, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look and we're going to compare and see if we were to apply these in the general population, what would be that actual overlap that we would see. So let me flip to, I'm going to flip to another sheet here. If you would like any of these sheets, just hit me up and I'd be happy to send them over to you. So what the effect size is, in the article, they used what's referred to as Cohens D, okay? And when you report an effect size, the effect size will tell you the magnitude of the difference. Like I said in the beginning of the video, you have this p-value and it says that these two groups are different. Statistically, the magnitude or size of that difference is not, we got a range from the 95% confidence intervals. Now we're going to get another idea of how big the magnitude of that size difference is through calculating an effect size. So here are some numbers. This was taken from Cohen and reported. I have the references on the bottom there. When you see effect sizes, they'll usually give you a number and then they will give you some kind of description. The name of the game here is the bigger the effect size, the better. Okay, and what that will tell us, if we look at this and you see that there is a large effect size, you're like, large effect size. Clinically, what does that mean for me? All we know at this point is it's better. Okay, we need something to kind of visually show us graphically how that works and what we could anticipate by using it. So let's show you that right now. So for example, let's say we have a large effect size Actually, let's take one from the article here. Okay, so this between groups effect size is a 2.63. And what it's comparing is the static stretch only group to the control group. Okay, now if we look on our chart here, 2.63, that's at the top. That's past very large. Okay, and the higher we keep going with the effect size, basically, the less overlap we have between the distributions that we're comparing. And that would be, in this case, we're comparing the static stretch only to the control group. Okay, so it's 2.6. And at 2.0, we roughly have an 81% of a non-overlap between the distributions. Now, what does that actually look like? Let's get a mental picture in our head. Let's go down here, right? So let's say that this salmon colored right here is our control group. And let's say this light purple color right here, this lavender color, is our static stretching only group. Okay, and then you have this dark purple in the middle. That is the percentage overlap. So there are some people right here in the static stretching group that won't have the same outcome as the individuals in the control group. And then there are some people, when we look at this purple area in the middle, the overlap, there are some people in the control group and a static stretching group that are going to land somewhere in the middle here. Okay, so what we want to do is the bigger number we have, the more that these start to divide out from each other, and the smaller that overlap gets. And if we have zero overlap, then that means that the groups are completely different from one another. That means that the treatment or the interventions are completely different, right? So in this case, let's see, we had 2.63. Let's go up here. Okay, we'll just end it at 2.0 because that's as far as my chart goes. But at 2.0 of an effect size, you have an 81% of the distributions not overlapping. Down here, this picture is a 47%, right? So roughly half. So if we were to take and almost double that, you would see that the salmon and the light lavender colors would go out further away from each other. And that tells you that the people in each group are less likely to have the same effect. The intervention would have the same effect on those individuals, if that makes sense, okay? So the name of the game when it comes to effect size, you want a large number, you want the least amount of overlap to show that the groups are different. That's it. So from a clinical standpoint, does that mean a whole lot? It depends if you're a stats nerd like myself. All it does is it just gives us another way to explain how big that difference is. If I was a clinician and I wanted to get right to the meat of this article, what I would do is I would start at the top, I would read the abstract, any questions I would have from that weren't specific enough, I'd go and I'd pick out individually from the article itself. And if I was pressed on time, then I would come right down here and I would say, all right, here's the means, here's the average of what they got. Now, what can I expect? And that is gonna be these guys. This is, again, where the money is at. So if I'm pressed on time and I want to give my individual, my client, my patient, the best outcome, and which one of these three am I going to do? And they fall into this demographic, you bet I'm going to pick that one in the middle because it gives me the most chance to make the greatest change, even though there is a possibility within about 6 degrees or so that even if I still do this, they could potentially fall down here. Okay, but if I had to pick two of these three, then it would be this one, then this one down here. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any other questions regarding how to use confidence intervals or effect sizes to help you improve your clinical application of research reported knowledge, hit me up, let me know. I also have another walkthrough here on confidence intervals and really how to use them. And it's real brief. It's only 2 pages. Again, that's all referenced as well. I just thought it would be better and it would kind of hit home a little bit more by actually using a study, so you could see what it's like. So take homes. Number 1, look to see if there is a statistically significant difference. That's your p-value, less than 0.05. Or if it's in high stakes research, it might be less than 0.01. Number 2, we want to know how big that difference is. Okay, and that will be reported through the effect sizes and the confidence intervals. Okay, the effect sizes will tell us how big the actual magnitude of the difference is, how much of an overlap we have between what we're comparing here and here. And then lastly, the confidence intervals tell us, 95% of the time we are likely to have an outcome of this treatment that will fall into this range clinically. So those are the 3 things that you want to look at. Okay, and if differences are found, I know some people would say, well, we got to look at the power of the study too. That's true, but if you have a statistically significant change, power is good. Okay, so I hope this helps everyone. If you need any more clarification, want to have any more conversation, let me know. And next time you pick up articles, don't just look at that p-value and look at the author's recommendation. Go down, look at the confidence intervals and see what's there so you can start using that information immediately with those you serve. Here at the channel, we're dedicated to establish and foster a positive interprofessional environment in which learning can occur regardless of your profession and or previous training. If you've used this type of approach with success, let us know in the comments below. Please help spread the word to your healthcare movement colleagues looking to incorporate more evidence-based training research application into their own practice. As always, if you like what you see here, please subscribe and join our YouTube channel community, where the #1 goal is improving the lives of those we serve. A big thanks for hanging out with us today. See you in the next video.